Hey guys, how's it going? So today I want to tell you about The Girl with Seven Names by Hyeonseo Lee. This is her memoir of growing up and escaping from North Korea. So I guess this isn't really a review because who am I to review the life story of someone who grew up and escaped from the most notorious dictatorship in modern day history, right? So I guess I'll just tell you some things to expect, what I liked about this book, and I'll actually share some really cool passages because this is beautifully written. So she was born in Hyesan, and she lived in a few different cities, but for most of her life was in Hyesan, which is a city that is on the Yalu River, which separates China from North Korea. And so she was born in 1980 and escaped in 97. And she actually, her family was of high Songbun. Now, Songbun is the word that refers to your place in the social hierarchy. So it's, depending on how many, brownie points your family gets, you'll be upper in the Songbun and have more privileges, or lower and less privileges. Now she explains, which I assumed would be the case in a dictatorship, that it is much easier to lower your Songbun than to get a higher Songbun. So, to get higher in the hierarchy. So because she was of a fairly high Songbun, or higher Songbun, then she was a little privileged in that regard. Her first name was Kim Ji-han. So in this story, she talks about how her mother so she met who would later become her father, out of love. Now, she was actually set to marry someone else because the other person was in the military, so he had a higher Songbun. And so she had to marry him, and she had Hyeonseo Lee as Kim Ji-hae. But very soon after that, she decided to leave him and go live with the actual love of her life. And so in that instance, Hyeonseo Lee got her second name, Park Min-young, as a toddler, basically. So even in North Korea, she had her second name. Now, I want to tell you about this because this is very early on in the book, so I don't think this would be too much of a spoiler. My annotation was truly just, it's wild because typically when you think of the expression putting yourself or walking in someone else's shoes, you think of it when you're trying to understand someone else's sorrows. In this moment, the expression walking in someone else's shoes meant being in their shoes to understand your shortcomings and how they had success. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So this is when her mother is telling her about the 70s and what life was like before she was born. She told me once that everything during that time acquired a kind of luster and magic. People around her seemed to share her optimism, and she may not have been imagining it. The world was at the height of the Cold War, but North Korea was enjoying its best years. Bumper harvests several years in a row meant that food was plentiful. The country's industries were modern by the standards of the communist world. South Korea, our mortal enemy, was in political chaos, and the hated Yankees had lost a bruising war against Vietnamese forces in Vietnam. The capitalist world seemed to be in decline. There was a confidence throughout the country that history was on our side. Well, little did they know, but I was floored when I read that paragraph. And this is maybe within this is what, page 5. This is page 5, and I already knew this was going to be a great book because, I don't know, when you read something that is able to make you question your reality, it's going to be a good book. You know it, okay? The third name is Cha Min-ran. Jae-min Run, sorry, my bad. So this is when she is 17. She goes to China for the first time. Now, she doesn't intend to stay. This is the night before she turns 18, and she has always wanted to see China because, like I said, she lives on the edge. Well, I didn't say it. She lives on the edge of the city of Hyesan. So she sees the lights in China every night. And, you know, on the North Korean side, there's no electricity, so it's all oil lamps or darkness. And she says, I've always wanted to visit China. And once they turn 18 in North Korea, or at the time at least, they would become responsible for their crimes, as opposed to when they're minors, their parents would be accountable for their crimes. So in this case, defecting would be death. So she's like, yo, I'm gonna check out China. The day, my last day, I'm gonna go and come back. Well, she doesn't get to come back because people are like, where is she? So she goes to her uncle and aunt's house in China, and I forget the name of the city off the top of my head. She takes on the identity Chae-min-ran. Her next identity change, and now this one, I will share the passage at the end because you'll see what I mean, but you probably already know if you've read the book. Her next identity is Jang Soon, what did I write? Jang Soon-hyang. So this is, while she's in China, she was offered the opportunity to marry someone to get an ID, because remember, at this point, North Koreans in China are hunted by the Chinese police. So she's hiding in the apartment. She's never leaving for months, actually like a year or two. She doesn't have an ID, nothing. And so this is her first opportunity to marry someone that her aunt found and get an ID. So that is the name that would have been. So next, the name is Chae-in. I gotta get my writing in check. Chae-in-hee. And so this is when she moves to Shanghai. A couple years later, she gets her first job, and so she takes the identity Park Sin-jun, right? Park Sun-jin. Forgive me, my handwriting stinks. Until she eventually escapes to South Korea and takes on the identity Hyeonseo Lee. My bad. So it is quite an adventure. It is very interesting. She talks a lot about the process of growing up, learning, you know, all the propaganda, what eventually broke her bubble. She talks about escaping to China, what it took to survive in China, convince Chinese authorities that she is not North Korean. Interestingly enough, she eventually has to convince South Korean authorities that she is North Korean because she was so good at lying, and they weren't convinced that she was, because, you know, she had a Chinese ID, and they were like, yo, how do you have an ID? So they actually initially thought she was Chinese, but anyway, it's really interesting. She talks about that, and then she talks about how years later, she would get her mother and her brother out of North Korea and get them to South Korea. So it was a different voyage for them. But it's definitely worth the read. If you want to understand the value of freedom, I would definitely say read this book and what happens when freedom is lost, which happens easier than you think. Okay, warning, I'm going to start reading my favorite passages. So if you're going to read the book and you don't want to know what's in it already, click off now. Otherwise, you can stay. Like I said, none of this really is a spoiler. There are so many more incredible passages in here. These are just the ones that actually made me laugh. One reason I think this book is so beautifully written is that there were some moments of, I'm not sure if they were intentionally funny, but I know some moments were intentionally funny, but you'll see what I mean. The first one is when Hyeonseo is talking with her uncle. She is still in North Korea, and this is the moment I'm telling you about when I say what finally burst her bubble. So she's talking about her uncle after, I guess, an incident that happened at school. I forget exactly what. But her uncle is really mad because he knows that they're being lied to, right? But Hyeonseo is, she's still, well, she's being taught all the propaganda, right? This is a dialogue between her and the uncle. You know, all the history they teach you at school is a lie. This was his opening, this was his opening shot. He started counting off the fallacies he said I'd been taught. He said that at the end of the Second World War, the Japanese had not been defeated by Kim Il-sung's military genius. They'd been driven out by the Soviet Red Army, which had installed Kim Il-sung in power. There had been no revolution, which is what they're taught, that there is a revolution and Kim Il-sung is like wham bam yo, like a genius military man of the universe, and save their butts. That's what the propaganda is. I had never before heard my country being criticized. I thought he was gone crazy. And they taught you that the South started the Korean War, didn't they? Well, here's some news for you. It was the North that invaded the South, and Kim Il-sung would have lost badly to the Yankees if China hadn't stepped in to save his arse. Now, I knew he'd gone crazy. Were you shown the little wooden cabin on Mount Pictou where Kim Jong-il was born? His tone was heavy with sarcasm. It's a complete myth. He wasn't even born in Korea. He was born in Siberia, where his father was serving with the Red Army. He could tell from my face I did not believe a word of this. He might as well have been telling me the earth was flat. Now this kind of made me giggle because I wrote, on my little note, I wrote, still plenty of people won't get the flat earth joke. So, I guess conspiracies don't really, aren't really culturally exclusive. I don't know, it just kind of made me giggle a little bit because I'm like, girl, even on our side of the border, some people won't get that. I'm sure she would have known when she wrote that it would have made some people's eyes be like, what is she talking about? The earth is flat, what? Okay, and the next part I totally tabulated. Oh my gosh. The mother's audacity, or the son's audacity, I should say. Man, if there's anything we have in common here is that alpha dude Jad bros are everywhere. So this is the part, if you haven't read the book, this is when she's in China, and like I mentioned earlier, her aunt arranged for her to marry someone. So it's the aunt's close friend's son. Now, he is a total bum, and the mom is like, yeah, I need to find someone to marry him because he's not marrying anyone on his own because, you know, he is a bum. And Chinese girls know that, but this, you know, maybe this North Korean girl can work for him. That's the vibe. So this is the part where Hyeonseo is talking to Gyun-soon, is his name, about the ID and the ID card. And he's telling her, you will get the ID only after you marry me. Whoa, a little bit sneaky, evil, rude. So, but here's the part that is truly had me gagged. Okay, so he's telling her, you'll get it after the wedding, Gyun-soo said with a smirk. He knows. He picked it out of my hands. Even he could tell I was having misgivings. More so when I learned that my new name, or what was it? Jang Soon-hyung. Even so, when I learned that my name meant, quote, the person respects elders and makes a good wife by following her husband and listening really well to him. Oh my gosh, and the mother picked the name. The mother picked the name, and the son knows, and she knows that going to from North Korea to being married with him is basically gonna be going from one prison to another. And girl, I was like, girl, you gotta run. And you know what? She did, so good for her. Ain't no bum worth North Korea. The audacity is everywhere. Oh my gosh. The next passage I want to share, I'm not going to read because it's a little bit longer, but she talks about how she, when she's in Laos, to be at the village where her mother and brother are in prison, to try to negotiate their way out. And she goes to this little coffee shop every day to get the rice or just to have lunch. And she talks about how she meets this man who's an American tourist, and she starts talking with him, but her English is really, really bad. And she tries to order rice or something. And, oh no, she tries to ask for the translation in English for something. And he says, that's rice. And she's like, lice, right? No, rice. Yeah, that's what I said, lice, or something like that. So just kind of poking fun at herself about how a lot of Asians might have a hard time pronouncing the R sound. And it was just a beautiful moment because the whole book is very immersive, and you kind of go through the motions with her. The first part I would refer to as like a realization phase, where you come to realize all the propaganda they've been taught, all the horror, the extent of the horror, essentially, especially, likely for an audience who has never experienced a dictatorship or a more oppressive regime. And then when she's in China and kind of, finding herself and finding ways to, live and survive, it's like a hopeful survival phase where you're just really rooting for her and you're like, yeah. And then when she has problems, you're like, oh man, what's going to happen? But then this beautiful moment comes up, because this is the first moment, I think, where there was intentional brevity, where she's poking fun at herself, and she's not out of the woods at this time in the story. But I think when she was writing this part with full 2020 vision, I think this might have been one of the moments where she realizes, I'm okay, like I'm gonna get out of it. Like everything that I need to have done has been done. And I think we can all relate with that kind of feeling where you're just a complete ball of stress, but you don't know yet that everything that you need to have done to come out of the situation has been done, but you haven't realized it yet. You could kind of feel her as an author right next to you as you're reading it. Just be like, just take the deepest breath of relief, really. And it's just, it was such a unique standout moment in the text. Arguably, she's not, quite out of the woods yet, but I think the biggest troubles were over at this point. And you as a reader really do just realize, okay, we're good. I can only recommend you read this book, if not to just appreciate your freedom a little bit more, understand what some people on the planet are going through, have gone through. You know what the worst part is? Everything she's describing was North Korea in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and from what public authorities and essentially everyone involved is describing, it seems like the cruelty levels have been just, it's so much worse. Human rights are so much worse. Well, I'd love to hear your comments on what I had to say about this book. If you've read it before, if this video has maybe piqued your interest. If you don't want to commit to the full book, she does have a lot of TED Talks and a lot of speeches that I think are very, they complement this book, and I enjoyed reading the book and listening to her speeches. So there you go. Yeah, let me know your thoughts below, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.